behalf of the Chicago Housing Initiative, we are very proud to welcome you to the Mayoral Candidates Forum tonight. My name is Etta Davis. I'm a resident of the Dearborn Homes and a representative of the Eugenia Burns Hope Center, and I will be one of your co-MCs for tonight.
Hey, my name is Rosa Esquivel. I am a representative of the Pilsen Alliance fighting against the gentrification of Pilsen for the past 16 years, and I will be our second MC for this evening. We are so proud to announce that we have over 1,300 people here tonight to stand for housing justice in the middle of one of the worst housing crises in history. We are all here tonight to be a part of the solution. Thank you.
All right. In the interest of time, we are going to launch right into learning more about the candidates in front of us and what actions they would take if elected to increase access to affordable housing, stabilize communities facing displacement, and promote racial and economic equity and inclusion. Please be aware that some of the candidates have a second commitment tonight on the northwest side for a candidates forum beginning at 7:30, so we will be running a tight program.
Okay, are we ready? So, with us tonight we have candidates Amara Enya, Jamal Green, Dorothy Brown, Gary McCarty, Lori Lightfoot, and Tony Prewinkle.
All right. Because we have over 1,300 people here tonight and so many important questions for the candidates to get through, we need everyone to commit to some ground rules for our night together. Number one, no disruptions or outbursts, please. We do have security. If you disrupt the event, you will be asked to leave. Second, please show respect to those who are attending the forum and to the candidates who have come here tonight. Number three, for the sake of time and respect, we are asking no cheering and no booing. Here's what you should do instead. You'll notice in your packet that there's a green card and a red card. If a candidate says something you like, go ahead and wave that green card in the air. And if a candidate says something that you do not like, go ahead and wave that red card in the air.
Okay, let's see if we understood. Let's practice this together. Housing is a human right. Yay! Apartments for rent for $3,000 a month. Great, so we got it.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like you to approve these group agreements for the forum tonight by waving your green card in the air. Okay, excellent. We are all together on this now. If you have a question that the candidates don't have time to respond to tonight, please pick up an index card from one of our floor team volunteers and you get your questions to them. We will submit these additional questions to the candidates as part of the follow-up candidates questionnaire. Candidates can use to share additional information about their housing platforms. We will email out the answers from all candidates by early January and post the responses on our website. If you would like to receive this information, please make sure you leave an email address at the sign-in table.
And lastly, if you are live tweeting the forum, the hashtags we are all using are listed on the inside corner of your program. They are hashtag Our Homes Chicago, hashtag Chai Housing, hashtag Reimagine Chicago, and last but not least, hashtag Vote Housing, because that is what we are going to do on February 26th, right? We are going to vote housing. So candidates, heads up. Okay, without further delay, we are going to get started with the candidates' opening statements. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to describe their commitment to building a more equitable and affordable city and repairing the historic injustices that have defined our city for too long. Candidate seating on the stage is arranged randomly by a number a candidate drew out of a hat. We are going to start with candidate Jamal Green.
All right, there we go. All right, how y'all feeling out there? All right, great. My name is Jamal Green. I want to first thank this organization for putting this forum together to hear our stances on housing, as well as all of you for attending to learn more about who should be a mayor in the city of Chicago. I was born and raised in Inglewood. I grew up seeing so many of these problems firsthand. People being shot in front of me, a lot of homeless friends that lived in trap houses that were abandoned, and I would help them. We've had so many problems in the city of Chicago throughout my life that I said that I would be committed to making the city better for the next generation, because it's up to us. We don't need the same old, same old. We need real ideas on how to move forward this city. And I'm someone who is committed to these problems because I've seen them firsthand, and I'm passionate about real change. But it's going to take for all of us to do it together. Thank you.
So my name is Tony Preckwinkle, and I've been committed to affordable housing since I began my political career as alderman of the 4th Ward in 1991. The first thing I did is send staff into housing court to get the city to stop demolishing vacant residential units and to work with receivers and developers to try to get those houses back on the market. I also supported new affordable rental developments in Grand Boulevard, Willard Square, and Hearts United, and worked with community residents, CHA residents, and CHA around CHA transformation projects in Oakland. 1/3 CHA, 1/3 affordable, and 1/3 market rate, mixed income units. Over the course of my tenure, we built 1,500 new units of housing. The city invests very little of our own corporate resources in housing. We need to do much better. We support the Housing Authority of Cook County by prioritizing our housing resources to them. And we need, in the city of Chicago, to make housing a priority, and we're not doing enough to support affordable housing. That has to change.
Good evening, everyone. I thank you all for being here. I want to echo the comments that were made at the outset. We are in the midst of an affordable housing crisis in the city. Make no mistake about it. And what we have to do is elect someone who understands that and will make sure that city government works to address this crisis in some specific and concrete ways. We're going to get into a lot of questions tonight, many of which are the same issues in our housing plan that we rolled out in October. But let me talk about a couple of them. One, we have to have a city government that eliminates red tape, provides for community-based housing developers and individual developers to have the resources that they need to be able to build units. We need to get rid of automatic prerogative that stops us from building units that are incredibly important all across the city. But first and foremost, we have to have a commitment and a passion for making sure that this crisis gets addressed at the earliest possible date. And I'm committed to that. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amara Enya. By profession, I'm a public policy consultant. I also work by passion as an organizer across the city. We're here today because of a fundamental question, and that question is, who gets to live in Chicago? Not just the Chicago of now, but the Chicago of the future. Who gets to be here? Who gets to afford to stay here? That is the fundamental question that we are grappling with. And my view is that the organizations and individuals who have fought to have a place that we deserve in this city deserve to be heard with specific plans that ensure that we can actually live in Chicago, not just today, but into the future. That is the work of my career. It is the value that I'm committed to, and hope to share more of the specific ideas with all of you this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Gary McCarthy. I spent 35 years in policing in 3 major cities in this country, in New York City, Newark, New Jersey, and here in Chicago. I worked in some of the most distressed neighborhoods, that you can imagine. And the thing that it's left me with is it's impressed on me that the issues that we face generally all come from the lack of recognition by the powers that be of the social economic divide that exists not just in this city, but certainly in this country. And all the issues that we're going to talk about kind of fall out from there, whether it's crime, taxation, the economy, or affordable housing. And we have very specific plans that will address all of those issues in a more holistic fashion, creating living wages in neighborhoods and affordable housing at the same time through training and workforce. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dorothy Brown, and I believe that Chicago is a tale of two cities. In some areas, it's flourishing, and some areas, it's like an economic desert. Some areas, we have high-value homes, and a lot of areas, we have low-value homes. Everyone deserves to be able to live in the city of Chicago. I believe that I have the perfect background, experience, and the heart to be the mayor of the city of Chicago. And the mayor is the most important part. I believe that enough is enough. It's time for change. We need someone that's concerned about you. I am concerned about you. I will make sure that everyone is able to live in fair and equitable housing within the city of Chicago. I will use my experience as an attorney to run the city council. I will make sure that I stabilize the finances of the city. It's time for change. It's time to vote for someone like Dorothy Brown. Thank you.
Thank you so much, candidates. We're going to begin our first question to the candidates tonight. Candidates are asked to respond yes or no to the question, and then each will have 60 seconds to elaborate on their position. Our first question asker will be Raymond Barrera from Logan Square Neighborhood Association.
Good evening, Chicagoans. Are we ready to imagine a new Chicago? Sure. Well, I am. My name is Raymond Barrera. I'm a youth leader with the Logan Square Neighborhood Association. Under our current affordable requirement ordinance, developers are mandated to create 10% affordable housing units if 10 units or more are created, or they're required to pay an opt-out fee. However, some of the loopholes that ARO creates are lack of family-size units and the disinvestment of our communities by developers choosing to take that money elsewhere with that opt-out fee. I ask you guys, as the mayor of the city of Chicago, how will you make sure that our communities are not disinvested from, and that we address the family-size units that are desperately needed in our working class family communities?
So, one of the biggest things is we have to hold accountable these developers who are running rugged in the city of Chicago. And that means making sure that they sign certain agreements that guarantee that they do certain things. For instance, community benefits agreements are a big thing right now. We have to make sure that when these developers, these big developers come into a neighborhood, that they sign these agreements, that they make sure that that agreements that make sure there's a certain percentage of affordable housing units as well as family units. But as the mayor, it's going to be using that bully pulpit to make sure that developers don't do what they want to do, and making sure that we keep them to their promises and not finding loopholes to get away with not doing what they're supposed to do. Thank you.
So I think we absolutely need to make the ARO stronger. We should review the opt-out fees each year to make sure they reflect market rate prices for units. We need to be sure that we have 20% affordability requirements for both zoning changes and city land and TIF assistance. You know, 2/3 of Chicagoans earn less than $75,000 a year, and we need to be sure that these families have access to affordable rental units, and that's not the case at the moment. There's a clear need for more affordable family units, particularly those that can accommodate families, and we need to get the development community, which is cleaning up downtown, to help us with the redevelopment and revitalization of our neighborhoods.
We have clearly a crisis, and we have to do some very specific things, and our housing plan lays those out. First and foremost, we've got to amend the Affordable Requirements Ordinance to make sure that there are more affordable units built by developers in the development, and then the ones that are built off-site have to be closer to that development. We've got to get rid of the automatic prerogative because, as you well know, there are too many neighborhoods in the city that have seen no affordable housing development either in the last 10 years or last 15 years, and that's an unacceptable problem. But again, first and foremost, we need to make sure that the city departments that are responsible for affordable housing actually see the priority and see the need, and that comes from a mayor who understands this problem. I'm a kid who grew up in what we now nicely call as housing instability, so I understand these issues deeply. I'm now a resident of Logan Square, and I know what's happening to my neighbors, so we've got to address these issues head on.
I come from a large family of 8 with 6 kids, and if anyone has had 6 kids, know that having more rooms is absolutely essential. Part of the problem with affordable housing in Chicago is we do not have a mandate for family-sized units. When people determine where they want to live, they're not just moving the parents, you want to move your entire family. So quite simply, the city has to mandate family-sized units where families can actually stay together. We can also do much better with the percentage of affordable housing that's set aside in development projects. I think the target should be 30% as opposed to 20%. That is something that the city can also do. Second is we have to get rid of the opt-out provision, which was put in place in the original ARO ordinance and essentially gave developers a way to easily pay a fine or a fee without having to do the one-to-one replacement that we should have had in this city. We have to get rid of the opt-out provision. Those are just a few specific things that we can do if we're serious about keeping families in the city of Chicago.
So first of all, I absolutely support the ARO. And I think it's unconscionable that there were 22 affordable 3-bedroom units built over a 10-year period in this city. I don't know how we could allow that to happen. But it's got to be about the loopholes that we mentioned. And I hate to tell you this, folks, but Chicago is all about loopholes. For instance, it's not pay for play if you make a campaign donation to a candidate. But at the same time, you could get the same benefit by doing so. That's just not okay. I'm all about closing loopholes. But affordable housing is a term that means different things to different people. And we have to have the neighborhood reinvestment so that we have the jobs so we can afford to pay for affordable housing at the same time. All of this means nothing without neighborhood reinvestment and jobs.
Now, 30% of the people in the city of Chicago pay over 50% of their income in rent. And 50% of the people pay over 30% of their income in rent. So obviously there's an absolute need for affordable housing. This affordable requirements ordinance reform, I absolutely support it. I would get rid of the opt-out clause in its entirety. I would obviously make sure that we allocate at least 30% or more within any development. Mandating family-sized homes is absolutely necessary because, of course, I came from a family of 10 with 8 children. So I understand the importance of making sure that you have the right number of, that you have family-sized homes. And I absolutely believe in tiered rent so that individuals within certain housing areas and within certain developments are able to pay rent according to their income size. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Our second speaker will be Reina Mejia from One Northside, and the person who will answer first will be Tony Prewinkle.
Hello to everybody. I am Reina Mejia, a member of One Northside. I have lived in an uptown neighborhood of Chicago since 1980s. Recently, my landlord gave me a notice saying that I had to leave my apartment in 30 days. I had to leave my community, and now I pay more in rent every month that I make at my work. Until a few years ago, the CHA was allowed to hold $400 million and leave 5,000 public housing apartments empty. I had to do what I had to do to survive and be strong for me and my 10-year-old son. But I should not have to suffer when there is no reason for it. If elected mayor, will you support making public housing available in all communities? 1-for-1 replacement of public housing units in future developments, including family units, protection of public land, so it is used to keep CHA accountable for its promises, transparency, and an easy system for applying for public housing. Thank you.
Well, clearly the Emanuel administration doesn't care about public housing. They've recently been exposed for stockpiling more than $400 million in surplus funds, while we have a shortage of 120,000 affordable housing units in the city of Chicago and 5,000 public housing units that are vacant. One of the first things we need to do is make them report to the city council, to the legislative body, so we can try to figure out what they're actually doing. Transparency is really important. We need 1-for-1 replacement of remaining public housing units in any future redevelopment, and they have to focus on family units. We need to protect CHA land. If you've noticed, we've been building grocery stores and athletic facilities on what historically were public housing sites. Public housing needs to be available in all our communities, not just concentrated in some, and we particularly need public housing in those parts of the city that are thriving and booming, and not just in those parts of the city where a community is struggling.
The fact that the CHA has stockpiled hundreds of millions of dollars while people are desperate for public housing and affordable housing, frankly, is criminal. And it's something that has to be changed. We've got to step up and we've got to make sure that we make a difference. On the questions that you ask, 1-for-1 replacement, making sure that we have family-sized units, of course, we should do all of those things. That's why in my housing plan, I specifically call for, frankly, an audit of the CHA to make sure that we were doing everything possible to use the resources and the tools that are available to solve this housing crisis. It's shameful the way in which we are treating people in the city. It's shameful that we are not using the resources that are available to address this crisis, and I can assure you, in a Lightfoot administration, that will change.
When it became public that CHA was stockpiling dollars while thousands of families were on the list, we saw the city scrambling to address that. And we're hearing a lot about what we need to do and what we could have done. Quite frankly, if the city is not held accountable for protecting public land, then no other conversation matters. Right now, there are no provisions in place to make sure that land that is designated for public housing stays for the use of public housing. That's where we need to focus. We also need to be much more creative about how we have that kind of accountability. And so we have not talked about the value of community land trusts for preserving land in the neighborhoods in community control and how that affects affordability. We've got to start implementing innovative ideas instead of just falling back on the same tactics that have not worked for us in the past. And so putting forth those ideas that create accountability for government to protect public land and have more more avenues for ownership, where communities have more say in the land, is where we need to be moving the conversation.
I smell corruption. I smell corruption in $440 million and 5,000 public housing units that we all know were being used for something, weren't they? And somebody was making money off of it. And like Lori, this is criminal in my book, and it needs to be investigated criminally. There's no reason in the world why every one of these principles is not adopted and enforced. But I want to add something to it. We want affordable housing in all neighborhoods. But what are we doing about fixing the ones that are having the biggest problems that people want to move out of? This has to do with quality of life, and it's not being addressed on that level. I see a much bigger picture. It's hard to separate these issues one from the other, but where it comes down to it, corruption, 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 the result is we all get screwed.
We have to start with the premise that we all are human beings and deserve to live wherever we want to live within the city of Chicago. I don't care what our income level is. We deserve to live wherever we want to live. This CHA transformation plan was the biggest trick played on the city of Chicago that has ever occurred in the history of this city. And we need to make sure that all the housing projects that are the public housing that's left, that there's a one-for-one replacement. I work with individuals or talk with individuals that actually have Section 8 or vouchers. And that program, the system that is in place, is just a travesty. To say that there were 5,000 units that people were needed and were not placed in is a travesty. To say that there was $440 million that could have been used and was not used is a travesty. Enough is enough. It's time for change, and I will bring that change. Thank you.
Knowing that, let me first just say, I think there are, if you look at every department, there's a cover-up in every department. And with this, knowing that they stockpiled hundreds of millions of dollars, overpaid their pension fund and didn't have any debt, yet there were thousands of people displaced, it's outright wrong, and it may be criminal. We need to make sure that they're being more transparent, so there needs to be a committee, affordable housing committee that reports directly to city council that looks into these issues. And then we must make sure that we preserve that land. We shouldn't have it to where we knock down public housing, Cabrini Green, and then you look up and we rebuild housing that's $3,200 a month. We must preserve public housing land and make sure that we keep it if we're fixing it up and not tearing it down to build new condos.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Our third speaker will be Ms. Annie Hodges from the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. And we'll have our first candidate to respond will be Lori Lightfoot.
Good evening. My name is Annie Hodges, and I am a member of the Oakwood Community Organization, Kenwood Oakwood Community Organization. Currently, skyrocketing rent across Chicago are causing widespread displacements of predominantly low-income and working families of color. There is a state law prohibiting the regulation of rent, but rent control is deeply needed to slow the increase in rent from year to year. We have a two-part question. I would like a yes or no for the first. Do you support rent control in Chicago? Yes or no? As mayor, what will you do to advance a rent control policy in Chicago?
As I mentioned before, I'm a resident of Logan Square, and I know very well the stresses that my neighbors are suffering from because of escalating property taxes that are causing landlords to raise rents and are frankly driving people out of the city, even homeowners. So what we have to do first is make sure that we are addressing the over 120,000 affordable housing units that we are down. We have to make sure that we break down the segregation in neighborhood after neighborhood that reinforces segregation and it doesn't allow for economic diversity in neighborhoods. That has to be our primary focus, because if we don't expand the pool of affordable units, people are going to continue to leave the city in droves. That's what I think our primary focus has to be. And of course, we have to address the gouging that's happening with people who are renters, where landlords are increasing their rents over and over again. But where it starts, frankly, is we've got to reform the corrupt property tax system, and I'll talk more on that in a moment.
So I would like to take my time to actually lift up the organizations that banded together and formed a citywide coalition to advocate for rent control across the city. That includes the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Pilsen Alliance, One Northside. It was quite a few that have already done the groundwork. What we have to do now is make sure that we hold the governor, our incoming governor, accountable for the promise that was made to support lifting the ban on rent control. So the work has already been done by organizers who identified this issue as critical to preserving the character of their communities. Now our task is to hold the incoming governor accountable for actually following through on the promise that was made. And in the mayor's office, we can make sure that we hold him accountable for fulfilling that promise.
Excuse me, but in the interest of time, we're going to start off with the answering of these questions with yes or no, so that we can save some time. And then we'll start with the remainder of the questions with maybe one candidate answering one question. Is that okay? So we'll name whatever candidate should. Yeah, we can finish this round, but please try to keep your answers to yes and no to make your answers a little bit shorter.
Yes, no. I'm kidding, because I'm not going to let anybody get away with that. To say that different things happen in different neighborhoods in this city is an understatement, isn't it? What happens on the northwest side and what happens on the southwest side are two different things. And I think that we have to ensure that there's equity, but that means rent control in one bold swoop might not be what we're looking for. Because what happens when services are now cut on the south side because property tax increases have cut the margins that the landlords are gaining. So that becomes a problem, where that's not going to happen on the north side. So I think there's going to have to be different parameters for different neighborhoods to create the equity that we're actually looking for. I hope that makes sense, because it's an economic formula that they will cut the services on the south side. You will have no heat. Other places they won't.
Yes, I support rent control. And as mayor, I will work with the state legislature and the governor to repeal the Illinois Rent Control Preemption Act. And also there's a Senate bill 3512 that's already going forward, to bring rent control as it relates to hiking rent. And also it talks about creating a board that will oversee any kind of rent control within the hiking of rent within the state of Illinois. And so, yes, I support rent control. Thank you.
Yes, I support rent control. There's been, I think, over the years, and many of you may agree with me, a strategic gentrification plan going on in City Hall in the city of Chicago. We must have rent control, but I think that right now it's very political in this political season, so everybody, mostly everybody will say that they're for rent control. But the question is, who has the real courage when they start rallying against you after you are for rent control to actually work with organizations and work with people to keep pushing it through? Because when they're mayor, then when those real estate developers and when those landlords and everybody start pouring money into you, who's going to stand their ground and be with the people? That's the real question that we need to ask.
Yes, I believe in rent control, and we have to work in Springfield to lift the ban on even talking about rent control. Will Gazzardi is the champion of that legislation in Springfield, and I enjoy his support. I'm very grateful for it. The majority of the residents in Chicago are renters, and rent prices continue to rise, and they destabilize many of our communities. So there are neighborhoods where people have lived for generations, and they now find themselves unable to afford their houses or find their rents increasing so dramatically that they can no longer afford to stay in the community. And we have to develop housing strategies and solutions that will engage people in community discussions about how we're going to meet those revitalization or those gentrification challenges. We've got to have neighborhoods all across the city that ordinary working people can afford to live in.
Thank you, candidates. So just to make sure, these are two-part questions. The first part you need to answer yes or no, and why. Our fourth speaker will be Mr. John Adams from One Northside, and the only candidate that's going to answer this question is Amara Enya.
Hi, my name is John Adams. I'm a leader from One North Side and a tenant of a single-room occupancy building. I previously lived at the Wilson Men's Hotel for 13 years until it was bought by a luxury developer, which displaced me and my neighbors. Before living at the Wilson Men's Hotel, I experienced street homelessness for a year. I know firsthand this pattern of displacement is all too common in Chicago. Currently, there are 80,000 Chicagoans experiencing homelessness. 60,000 are living doubled up, meaning they have moved in with family or friends, but have no place to call their own. The Bring Chicago Home Coalition recently launched a campaign to raise the real estate transfer tax by 1.2 percentage points on properties over $1 million. This new revenue stream could raise $150 million a year for housing and services for people experiencing homelessness. If elected mayor, will you support an ordinance to raise the real estate transfer tax to address homelessness?
Okay. The first question to answer will be Amara Enya. We will have all the candidates answer this question. It was a misunderstanding.
Yes, I do support the real estate transfer tax. So the real estate transfer tax is actually one mechanism, a pretty solid mechanism for generating revenue in the city of Chicago. I actually advocate for being a little bit more specific about how those dollars that are generated from an expansion of that tax are used. Specifically to address the issues of mental health and behavioral health services that are necessary, which we know contribute to homelessness, addressing issues of substance abuse. In my neighborhood, those services have been cut, and we know that a large part of the reason for homelessness is dealing with substance abuse. And also, people need to be able to function in the economy. And so workforce training opportunities where people can get training and the skills necessary so that they can be self-sufficient is also a critical part of what we should be talking about. And finally, we have to specifically address the issue of youth homelessness, in particular in Chicago public schools, and making sure that those funds, there's some that is earmarked to address young people who have no support systems and are dealing with homelessness in the city of Chicago.
So the answer is yes, I do support an ordinance to raise the real estate transfer tax to address homelessness. I'm not sure where we came up with the figure of 1.2%, and I always am interested in learning that. Because I could tell you this, in the Chicago city budget, we've done political spending and not needs-based spending. And there is plenty and plenty of revenue in that budget that needs to be squeezed out, and I could give you example after example. How about $62 million for a bike path over Navy Pier, when we're not providing social services in the neighborhoods that we need it the most? How about $95 million for a new police academy that we all know is $180 million because nothing gets done on budget or on time in the city of Chicago? And those social services can be supported for mental health, addiction-related, substance abuse issues that will help prevent homelessness in the first place.
Yes, I support the real estate transfer tax ordinance, but I also would probably look at bringing it down from just homes a million and over, maybe to homes of 500,000 and over, so that we can actually get even more money to support individuals that are homeless. Homelessness is really a crisis in the city of Chicago. We have veterans homelessness that we have to really deal with. We have the homelessness of our children. There are a lot of issues that are surrounding homelessness. I visited an organization recently called Revive Chicago, and it is actually addressing homelessness. And I think that we need to put more money into agencies like that. Also, Rockford actually has been noted nationally for addressing the homelessness of veterans, and we want to look at programs like that Rockford has, and not only address the homelessness of veterans, but homelessness for everyone. Thank you.
I want to first thank Gary McCarthy for not being for a police academy. Thank you. And next, I want to say that yes, I am for a real estate transfer tax. A portion of that money will go to a program that we had put forth that we have so many homeless youth, 20,000 homeless youth in the city of Chicago, and we want to take abandoned properties in these neighborhoods and allow them to live in these properties by just doing counseling and going to school and making sure that they keep their grades good. All right. Secondly, not only do we need to make sure we have a real estate tax that are for those who are rich, but we need more taxes to help fund homelessness, like a corporate head tax, like a LaSalle Street tax, the real revenue that can actually get us to a point where we're not talking about the $400 million that they set on, but we're talking about billions of dollars to go towards housing throughout the city of Chicago.
Yes, I support the real estate transfer tax. You know, I think we got to be aware of the fact that although the city estimate is about 5,000 homeless people, the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless estimates that it's about 80,000 people, and a quarter of them are children. We've got to figure out how we're going to address this population, and that means a dramatic increase in our investments in affordable housing, particularly multi-unit housing and mixed-use housing. I realize we've got to respect the fabric of our neighborhoods, but the only way in which we're really going to meet the challenge of building affordable housing units is to build multifamily buildings and mixed-use buildings in our neighborhoods. And that's a challenge because in some of our communities, there's a hostility to density and a hostility based on race and class, I think, to affordable housing, period.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll have Carmen Batances from the Jane Addams Senior Caucus.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I haven't had an opportunity to address the question. No. We started with Ms. Enya.
Okay.
Yes, I support the change to the real estate transfer tax, and I've specifically called for a progressive change, meaning that we'll provide tax relief for most individuals in the city for houses that are valued at $500,000 or less. We will make that progressive so that houses that are more expensive actually pay more of the freight, and we give relief to people on the other end of the economic scale. We talk specifically about dedicating those savings and those increased funds to address the homeless problem. Folks, we have the way in which we treat homeless folks in this city is an actual sin. If you go just east of here along the expressway, you can see a growing tent city of people who are living on the streets. Everywhere we go in the city, we see that this is a problem. We see that people are being disrespected, that their belongings are being tossed into the trash when the police come and decide that they need them to move along. So we have to absolutely address this issue, and I've got a specific plan for how to do that.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Now we'll have Carmen Batances from the Jane Addams Senior Caucus. And we'll start with the candidate's response from Gary McCarthy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carmen Betances, and I live in Elizabeth Wood Senior Apartments, a CHA building in Lincoln Park. I am a member of the Jane Addams Senior Caucus. As a resident, I have seen and experienced the daily terrors of living in subsidized senior housing. Management harasses and retaliates against residents that stand up for themselves and advocate for safe living conditions. Seniors suffer and are desperate for change. They are subjected to units without heat during winter, bed bugs infestations, conditions detrimental to our well-being, and no grab bars for the convenience of developers. Seniors are not done living and should be treated as human beings. This is why we need the senior housing platform and for the next mayor of Chicago to make seniors a priority all year round, not just when they need our votes. The senior housing platform includes 1, passing the Chicago Relocation Plan Ordinance, the Senior Housing Bill of Rights, and 3, a fully funded Senior Housing Bureau. Will you endorse and work to pass the senior housing platform?
Well, I was going to say absolutely, but you already said it, so I'll just say yes. This is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart. This is about, not just about equity and fairness. I believe it's the Chinese that say the measure of a society is how it treats its elders. And I got to tell you, I had an opportunity that, unfortunately, my mom fell on some very hard times. I took her into my house and I took care of her for 7 years. I don't know what would have happened to her if it were not for my family's support of her. I've been involved in this issue for a very long time. It's very emotional for me. I've responded to crime scenes where seniors were not made safe, robbery patterns that extended to 160 robberies in senior housing developments that we had to go and arrest the monsters who were beating up seniors. Fundamental fairness, absolutely, taking care of seniors all the time, period, safety.
And the answer is yes, I will support the senior housing platform. I recently had to take care of my 93-year-old neighbor who had me as his health care power of attorney. And it was just a travesty how I was not able to get timely services from the city of Chicago for my neighbor. As a matter of fact, maybe 3 months later, he actually died. We waiting for services from the city of Chicago. Housing is so important for seniors. They are so helpless. Seniors deserve to be treated like human beings. You know, there's some areas in the world that throw seniors over in a volcano. We should not do something. It's like we're doing that to seniors here in the city of Chicago when we do not provide them proper housing. When you're taking away the housing for whatever reason, relocation, we need to make sure that we're not just relocating them, but we're making sure that they're being properly served as well. Thank you.
Yes, I support the senior housing plan. I think that it is very, very important that we take care of our seniors, but not just, in regards to housing, but how they're treated in those housing facilities. One of the biggest things is that suicide ratings for seniors is higher than the national average. We got to make sure that we have wellness professionals dealing with our senior citizens throughout the city of Chicago, which is why my suggestion of building wellness centers instead of mental health centers would work directly with these senior housing facilities to make sure that we're reducing those depression rates.
Yes, I support the senior housing platform. I mean, one of the challenges that we had when I was alderman is trying to work with CHA around their own housing developments. We had 4 CHA senior housing buildings in my ward. We were always after them about management issues, about roaches and mice. And so we have to hold CHA accountable because they house a large number of our senior population. And historically, they haven't done a consistent job of providing good and decent housing for our seniors. I also worked with not-for-profits to build 3 senior housing developments during my tenure. I think it's critical that we provide affordable housing for our seniors. And we need to put, as I said, more of our corporate dollars into housing, not just passing through the federal dollars.
Yes, I support and will be a strong advocate for the senior housing platform. But this issue is much broader than just housing. Housing clearly is one of the issues that we have to make sure that we get right for citizens of every demographic and every age. But in particular for seniors, we've got to be thinking about ways in which the city can be a real partner in making sure that we improve the quality of life for seniors. I'm blessed to have a 90-year-old mother. My father lived into his 80s. So I know firsthand about the challenges of making sure that seniors have access to quality health care, that they have advocates who can speak up for them when they can't speak for themselves, that they know their rights and they have access to legal services as necessary. They also have to have access to mental health and trauma-related services. So there's a lot more that we can do to comprehensively make sure that we are honoring our seniors and that at the end of their life is comfortable and that they have a quality of life that we can all be proud of.
I guess I just don't understand why this is an issue. Why everyone, if we are so blessed, will become a senior, an elder. And why at this point, in 2018, we're talking about what we need to do for our elders. There's just something culturally wrong with that. There's something culturally wrong with that. To me, this isn't, we can talk about programs and interventions, but what we need is leadership and communities that actually care about people, fundamentally, that we actually will fight for our seniors. This has nothing to do with developers and relationship with developers, but a fundamental human dignity that every elder is afforded, should be afforded, and whether or not we have city government that cares about people in the city of Chicago. That means we actually have to have organizing without fear of retaliation. It means we need to allocate funds in the budget so that inspections are actually taking place in these senior buildings, that maintenance is actually being done on time. Those are the things that the city of Chicago should be doing.
Thank you, all the candidates. And now we call up Angela Lacey from Access Living. And the person who's going to answer first will be Dorothy Brown.
Hello, I'm Angela Lacey. I am a housing activist for Access Living. I've been living in an inaccessible apartment for 5 years now. This is because there is no affordable, accessible housing in Chicago. It's so bad that Access Living has sued the city. Do you commit to building 3,000 units of accessible, affordable housing for people with disabilities? Thank you.
I commit to addressing the shortage of housing within the city of Chicago for the disabled. I have 2 disabled siblings, and I understand the importance of having accessible living for the disabled. So yes, I commit to addressing the 3,000 units that are deficient for the disabled within the city of Chicago, but also commit to making sure that we have a properly funded Office of People with Disabilities, and that particular department is properly staffed to address all the needs of people with disabilities within the city of Chicago. Thank you.
Short answer is yes. I think these issues and concerns are, something that we all will agree with. It's about if it's something that we will stand to. But when you're talking about building affordable housing, we have to make sure that units are accessible. But if you look at Chicago, we are not an accessible city all the way around the board, which is why the majority of our L stops don't have elevators, are not accessible for even people to move around. All right, so we must, as in the 5th floor, make sure we are allocating enough money to make sure that this is a fully accessible city, not just in housing, but most importantly in transportation as well.
So we need to dramatically increase the number of accessible and adaptable units that we provide as part of our housing stock. We also need to provide modification assistance for homes. A lot of our seniors could age in place if we had grab bars in the bathrooms, if we had stairways chairs that would take them up to the second floor of their home. And we're not investing in those kinds of modifications for our seniors that would keep them out of nursing homes, keep them out of care facilities. So we've got two challenges, one around seniors and one around accessible and adaptable units for people of all ages. So this is a real challenge for the city of Chicago, and it's part of our larger housing challenge, the shortage we have, again, of affordable units, and particularly affordable units for people with disabilities.
My answer is yes, but of course we need to do more than 3,000. When we think about 120,000 units down of affordable housing, a much greater percentage of those units have to be for people with disabilities, and making sure that they are able to enjoy their housing without fear and without having to do great modifications because they're simply not accessible to people in the city. Look, this is an issue, and I think Jamal's frankly 100% right. This isn't just an issue about housing. We have to make the city generally more accessible, whether it's elevators, whether it's L stops, whether it's other kinds of grocery stores. This city has to live up to its mandate if it wants to be an inclusive city, and clearly people with disabilities have to be able to enjoy the richness and prosperity of the city in every form and fashion, including in the workplace.
When we talk about making the city affordable or accessible for all, the two biggest barriers to that is, one is affordability. So you'll get complaints that it's too expensive. And two is the claim of ignorance, that there's just no knowledge on how to make an entity, a building, an L-stop more accessible. So the two things that we should be doing is, one, creating incentives for those modifications to take place, whether with large-scale developers or individual homeowners. But the other thing that I find, frankly, exciting as we look to the future is making sure that the city can actually work with developers to show them different methods of design so that they're building new construction that's already accessible. We should not have to always have to go back and retrofit existing older buildings. We should actually be incorporating new design methods into all new construction. The city can actually take a lead on that by working with developers across the board so that everyone for future generations will have accessible housing and accessible spaces throughout the city.
So I'm going to do it also and say that Jamal was correct, because accessibility doesn't just start and end with housing. And the question is, how are we going to address it? This is going to cost money. But there's also federal standards that need to be adhered to. And it starts with coming into compliance with federal law, which means that if landlords are not doing that, they need to be held accountable. So the answer here starts with the process of first defining what needs to be done, what the city would be accountable for, what landlords would be accountable for, and then holding people accountable to the standards they're supposed to be. There's a process for doing this. At the end of the day, the real question is, where's the money going to come from? And this is what I was talking about, needs-based spending versus political spending, which is all we've done in this city forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have Lanisa Young from Southside Together Organizing from Power. And the candidate with the first response will be Jamal Green.
Hello, future mayors. I am Lanisa Young, a future homeowner in the Woodlawn community and also a student at Hyde Park Academy. I am ecstatic at the idea that the Obama Library is coming to the community, but also I am frightened that at the point that I might not be able to complete my dream as a homeowner because there wasn't a community benefits ordinance in place. Will you support a community benefits ordinance to stop displacement in the area around the Obama Center? This ordinance we are calling for will set aside 30% of new housing as affordable, provide property tax relief, and put money aside towards affordable housing and job training. Yes or no? Also, please explain if you would support similar ordinance when develops could cause gentrification.
Short answer, yes. I talked about it a little bit earlier. You know, one of my biggest things, and the former president talked about how we won't see gentrification until his kids have kids, all right? We obviously know that isn't true. While I am amazingly inspired by the president, probably one of the reasons why I'm sitting up here, we still must make sure that we're understanding that communities have to benefit. It's not about the emotion that we have with loving the president. We need to make sure that all developers, not just the Obama Foundation, sign community benefits agreements throughout the city of Chicago. And we can't let politics and loving Obama and allowing them to just smooth one on by us with building an Obama Center and a golf course, thinking that we're actually going to be able to stay around the place, all right? So at the end of the day, we must hold them accountable. I will be one to hold the president accountable. I love you, President Obama, but we would not let the community suffer after being there.
So I'm a supporter of community benefits agreements. When the Olympic Village was proposed for the 4th Ward, we worked out with community activists a community benefits agreement and got it passed in the city council as part of our package that went to the Olympic Committee. I don't know why the Obamas have decided that they will not support a community benefits agreement, but my view is the city can do one anyway. This is an historic opportunity for us. We haven't had a presidential library in 200 years, and we're probably not likely to have one again in 200 years. And I don't know about you, but I saw a photograph of a young African-American woman looking at the picture of Michelle Obama in the National Portrait Gallery, and she was awestruck. And I want young African-American women who can walk to this library be able to do so and think of Michelle Obama and think of her, the arc of her life. So the next mayor has to work with the community to put together its own community benefit agreement, despite the fact that the Obamas did not support one.
Of course, we need to be doing everything that we can to make sure that the people in those communities have a seat at the table, that they're not being displaced, and that they're going to get the benefit of this enormous investment. I won't stand on the sidelines like, frankly, Rahm Emanuel has done, while people in those communities' voices are not being heard and are being disregarded. So we have to change that. The second part of your question is, what about community benefits elsewhere? Every time we look at a huge investment, we need to make sure that the community is protected, has a seat at the table, and absolutely the mayor has a role to play in that. The problem that we see with development is that the city has not had a land use plan since 1966. And what that means, folks, is that our development needs, where we see development north of Roosevelt Road and east of Ashland and nowhere else, is because development in the city is left to the good benefits of the developers who may or may not share our values. So the city has a role to play. I will be very active in this area.
I again want to lift up the organizers and individuals and families who came together on the South Side to be proactive about a community benefits agreement long before the election cycle, long before it became a hot topic. That work should not go unnoticed, and I stand with them then, and I stand with them now. The next step for us as a city, because the Obama Presidential Center is just a potential hallmark opportunity to demonstrate nationally what it means to have a community-driven development philosophy. If they fail on this measure, the city still has a responsibility to determine objective metrics for any development project, that a community benefits agreement should be attached to it. Because the history of development in Chicago has been one of displacement and lack of accountability, and then after the fact, we sort of shrug our shoulders. So CBAs should extend beyond just the Obama Presidential Center. It should be the city saying that if we have a community-driven development philosophy, we believe that certain projects of these objective metrics should have CBAs attached to them.
So there's been a lot said already about this, and I'm not going to regurgitate the same old things. I do agree with the community benefits agreement, but I think that there needs to be a stimulus package attached to that community benefits agreement, because right now, as I read it, it sounds like a community protection agreement, and we can do better. This should be stimulating economy and jobs in the neighborhood. This is the same issue why I wondered if Amazon actually did come to Chicago, what impact would it have on this city? More people coming from the suburbs to go downtown and work and then go home. So I think that this has to go further. I think we need to take an exceptional step and make sure that when projects like this are incorporated into the city, there has to be some sort of an onus on the builders over the long term how to stimulate the economy in those neighborhoods and provide jobs.
Gentrification should not equal displacement. The Obama Center is being placed in an area that has been neglected for a number of years. And just because now the area is going to have the Obama Center and it's going to be flourishing does not mean the people that are there should not enjoy that. So yes, I support a community benefits agreement. I want to make sure that the individuals that are living there enjoy it. This young lady that goes to Hyde Park High School, it's right across the street. That school needs to be rehabbed, and those students that are currently going there need to be able to go there when the Obama Center is there. I have a friend that lives in that area, and they have already started to come around there asking them to sell their property. Those people deserve to be able to live in that neighborhood right with the Obama Center. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Next, we will have Cheryl Johnson from People for Community Recovery. And the first candidate to answer the question is Tony Prewinkle.
Hey, y'all. My name is Cheryl Johnson, and I'm a long-term resident of Allgale Gardens. And I've been an environmental activist for 33 years. My question to you guys, environmental justice is a term used for equal environment protection for a community of color. In your administration, will you address fair housing, safe housing, and economic opportunity for a community that's of color, particularly in the Brownsville community, Pilsen, McClenny Park, Little Village, and the Calumet industrial area? We don't want to see pollutant jobs. We want to see green industrial jobs. So how would your administration support that?
Well, I think the first thing we need to understand is one of the things that Rahm Emanuel did initially was eliminate the Department of the Environment. And we need to recreate the Department of the Environment. Somebody's got to be focused on this global challenge to our existence as human beings. And surely environmental justice is part of that, but we need this broad Department of the Environment. And the first thing we ought to focus on, frankly, is lead in our drinking water. We should have lead-free drinking water for all of our residents. That means we've got to inventory the service lines. We've begun that, but we've got a long way to go. We've got to disclose information about where the problems are. We've got to help finance the replacement of lead service lines. We've got to target schools and daycare centers. So we have some real challenges, and I would begin, frankly, with this whole question of lead in our drinking water. We've seen what happened in Michigan and the challenges those communities face. We've got to address that challenge promptly, and it's not going to be cheap.
The reason why we have so many communities that are suffering and are victims of companies who come in and frankly rape and pillage without any regard for the health and well-being of people in those communities is because we have a city who turns a blind eye to developers. We have a city who is not holding people accountable. President Prewinkle, I think, is right. We've got to reinvigorate the Department of the Environment, but that's not enough. We've got to make sure that we are respectful of the rights of people in the communities, that we bring them to the table, and that no development goes in, that's certainly not one, without an environmental impact study, and that people have an opportunity to weigh in on what happens in their neighborhoods. That's not happening now. That's got to change, and it will in a Lightfoot administration.
The question of environmental justice is a question literally of life or death in the city. We have communities across the city where they're inhabiting areas where the soil is contaminated with manganese, where polluting companies are striking deals with elected officials that allow them to continue polluting. and where you know what your value is to the power structure in the city based upon where those polluting companies are able to locate. This is an issue of pushing back against a development philosophy that prioritizes the needs and desires of a company over the lives of our residents. And there are a few specific things that we have to do. One is we actually have to address our current zoning laws. Many of the areas that are zoned now have families living in those areas. We have not upgraded our zoning laws to reflect the reality of the conditions in many of these communities. And we have to consolidate an entire department that's devoted to looking at environmental justice issues specifically and putting forth recommendations to mitigate those hazards in our communities.
There's a couple of ways that we can start by addressing the environmental issues that we face in this city. I know so many people who I've met here in Chicago who lived on the South Side growing up and have now contracted, and many of them have passed away from different forms of cancer. That's not even been addressed yet. What we're talking about is what we're going to do moving forward. So we have to have a plan that goes forward and backwards. We have to do environmental studies of those areas where these issues are evident, and we do have to look at lead in the water. And the thing that disturbs me the most about lead in the water is the fact that, whether or not you know it, there is a fund called the Enterprise Fund, which is self-generating from the airports and is to be used for the airports and the water. That is now being used to pay some pensions. That's not okay. The fund exists for a reason. We need to use it for that. We need to look at our children's future with the lead in the water.
You know, it's really a travesty what happens in the neighborhoods that have been neglected the most. People, the mortality rate is higher, and the diseases that occur there, they are food deserts. It's really an economic desert. And we need to I will make sure that we put back in place an environmental protection department within the city of Chicago and specifically focus on bringing in companies. In my community economic development plan, I have a urban policy plan that deal with the areas that have been neglected the most. And I want to bring in companies that do green technology types of jobs and make sure that we are addressing the environmental deficiencies within certain in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
So I want to echo President Preckwinkle and say that we definitely need the Department of Environment back in City Hall. But we also must make sure they are transparent. And one of the biggest things is when it comes to environment problems, they don't hold public hearings or actually talk to the people in these neighborhoods. So that must happen when the Department of Environment is enacted. Now, I was the first candidate to release a plan on how to deal with the lead in the water. All right, this has been something that has been big and dear to me, and how we need to share the costs and make sure we have a low-income fund for those who are in low-income neighborhoods and prohibit lead service lines immediately. When we're changing main service lines, we must change those service lines, and we'll share the responsibility in that, especially since we shouldn't be dealing with this problem now, and we don't want to be like Flint in 20 years. And we got to make sure that we bring green jobs as well. I knew you was doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our final question asker will be Monica Dillon from Neighbors for Affordable Housing. And we'll have our first candidate response from Lori Lightfoot.
My name is Monica Dillon. I am a member of Neighbors of Affordable Housing, a volunteer housing advocacy group from the far northwest side. We organize the communities close to O'Hare Airport, which are rich in jobs, transportation, and amenities, but lack the affordable housing options to make these opportunities accessible to low and moderate income families. We have witnessed aldermanic prerogative used inappropriately as a tool of exclusion and segregation in the 41st Ward. Our organization is one of 10 plaintiffs in the fair housing lawsuit filed against the city by the Shriver Center last month. Our legal complaint provides extensive evidence that the city's long-standing practice of granting aldermen unfettered control over whether affordable housing is developed in their wards violates the Fair Housing Act and functions as a tool of new Jim Crow policies that retrench segregation. As mayor, do you commit to work collaboratively with the plaintiffs to realign the city's planning and zoning processes to advance equity and ensure that affordable housing is distributed extensively across all Chicago's neighborhoods, not just some? Thank you.
Yes and yes. If you look at my housing plan, it specifically addresses the issues that you've raised in your last question. I followed with great interest what Alderman Napolitano did to stop that housing unit, which would have provided affordable housing for workers at O'Hare. That was wrong. And the city is going to pay for that because the developer has sued the city. Another squandering of precious tax dollars because we allow aldermen to have a veto right over what is a city-wide crisis, and we've got to stop that. My plan specifically talks about the problem of aldermanic prerogative, what we need to do to stop it. The fact that we've had areas over the city, probably 3/4 of the city, that have built 0 affordable housing units in the last 15 years tells you what the problem and the danger is of aldermanic prerogative. It's a problem in housing, it's corrupting as part of our city government, and we have to do better.
My answer is yes on both questions, and I fully support the lawsuit that is actually in process. The question of where people are able to live is a fundamental question of the city's philosophy about who's valued and who's not. Affordability is not just where the homes are located, it's whether you can afford to live in those places, and it's about the narratives that we tell ourselves about who affordable housing caters to. If we believe fundamentally that everyone has the right to live anywhere in this city, then we should mandate affordable housing everywhere that people want to live, which is close to transit areas, which is in safe communities, which is close to their jobs. Those are the things that, regardless of your background, your accessibility, your race, your ethnicity, everyone wants. And if we believe that you should be entitled to housing anywhere in the city, then our philosophy in the Department of Planning and the new Department of Housing that was created should reflect that.
My answer is yes and yes also. In a democratic society, nobody should have absolute control over anything. And at the end of the day, people have to jump through hoops to get things done in this city. Whether it's build affordable housing, whether it's get a permit, anything that you need to do, the first 6 answers from the administration is no. And that's got to change. That's part of the culture of Chicago. You got to have a guy if you're going to get something done. That's not fundamentally fair. That's not about equity, and that's not okay. What we've got to change is the politics of Chicago and bring business management to city government, not keep using the same processes that always got us here. Because if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got.
As I started out by saying, we're all human beings, and we deserve to be able to live anywhere in this city. I issued a comprehensive economic and community development plan that talks about community health and wealth building. And I specifically stated that we need to get away from this ward-level approach for economic development. Just because you're elected alderman does not make you an economic development expert, and it does not make you a housing expert. I want to divide the city up into 8 planning districts and have input from the community as it relates to economic development and specifically housing. People deserve to live anywhere they want to live in this city. Yes, this new Jim Crow where you actually have laws in place or permit it where individuals can make a particular area or keep people from living in a particular area is wrong, and it must stop, and it would stop with the Brown administration. Thank you.
All right, somebody said thank you, Dorothy Brown. Thank you, Dorothy Brown. Everybody answer was the same. Let me just echo it. We have to eliminate alderman prerogative in the city of Chicago. Because basically, we have policies and ordinances that, or policies that allow the alderman to be corrupt, right? And so we cannot, we have to get rid of those loopholes that the aldermen can slide by because they're trying to make happy their developers who's coming into their neighborhood, and make sure that we set City Hall values of we believe in affordable housing and we believe in CBAs. All these different things we talked about has to be said from the top down to the aldermen through all of the 50 wards, and we must not allow them to have power over overturning us.
Yes, and yes, we have to have affordable housing all across the city. Again, we built 1,500 units of housing, almost all of it affordable rental housing, when I was alderman of the ward. We couldn't have done it without support of the mayor's office. So the mayor really has to work with the local elected officials to make this happen. However, I know that my priorities, that is building affordable housing, were not universal in the body. And so the mayor has to take leadership to try to be sure that we have affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods. That's the mayor's job. The mayor should be focused on access, on equity, and on community benefits all across the city.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. A big applause for all of the candidates. Thank you so much for being here.